nous allons entendre, pour savoir quelle conclusion on peut tirer de ce voyage, nous allons entendre deux personnes exceptionnelles. On fera la pause après, pas avant Thierry Magnin, mais après Thierry Magnin, puisque je serai avec le retard qu'on a pris plus cohérent. Deux personnes exceptionnelles, un philosophe et un théologien, qui est aussi un physicien, un philosophe américain, un théologien et physicien français. Et donc maintenant, je vais donner donc la parole à mon ami Philippe Clayton, avec qui nous avons fait, quand vous avez vu le PowerPoint défiler tout à l'heure, de nombreux grands programmes internationaux. C'est un des meilleurs spécialistes au monde dans le domaine sciences et religion. Et il est venu spécialement de Californie pour juste 2 jours pour cette conférence. Je le remercie. Philippe Clayton. Yeah, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, how is it possible? How is it possible that we are here in this room for a conference on science and knowledge from matter to spirit? I mean, come, how can it be possible that the speakers are saying the things that they're saying? Scientists are saying these things. Come, surely science and matter go together. Perhaps the connection between science and consciousness is beginning to be accepted. But spirit, ladies and gentlemen, how is that possible? Something has changed. A kind of conversation is possible now that was not possible before. It's like new horizons open up before us. A new kind of conversation is possible. In fact, a new paradigm is being offered to you as the audience, to us as intellectuals. In fact, I would say that nothing less than a revolution is taking place in our time, in our day. So I ask you, where have been the changes? What are the causes of this revolution? Clearly, some are cultural. We have seen in recent years the rise of the study and the practice of spirituality. Some changes are social. They are in the fabric of our society. Some are historical. There's been, as Tuan showed, a development over time that makes this possible. And actually, some are religious. It's now possible for a religious person, a Christian, for example, to engage in practices that would have been unheard of before. Religious people who practice yoga, meditation, holistic healing. I mean, this is a radical change. Now we are allowed to engage in a journey to explore the universe, matter, life, and consciousness from a holistic perspective that was never allowed before. If we are to understand what has changed, we must take the journey through the sciences as we have done today. There is no shortcut. Paul Ricoeur speaks of not the short way, but the long way to the understanding. But when we take this journey, it leads us to a new place. Perhaps you know the British poet, T.S. Eliot. He writes, "We will return to this place, and we will know it for the first time." I believe that there was some sort of higher reality in the beginning, which many call God or Allah or Brahman or the Tao. And we engage, like the picture that Anne drew, in a large U, from an origin of ultimate reality through the world of science and human experience, and upward again in the rise of spirituality. This is the journey which it is our privilege to take. I invite you to journey into the space between the atoms, the space between mind and consciousness, and the connection. The journey of emergence into the unknown, into a mystery that perhaps transcends what we can understand. So, in today's talk, you have heard examples from multiple disciplines. Astrophysics from Tuan and the emergence of something maybe necessary and unified. Fundamental physics and the role of quantum openness, quantum strangeness that somehow invites us in to the story. And from Mario, the link between brain and mind and consciousness and powers that surprise us. They seem outside the ordinary, and yet they seem actual. I want to concentrate in my few minutes on the field that I know best, theoretical biology. Michael Denton spoke of the structures that guide life, but I wish to speak of the agents. You see, this is already controversial. For centuries, treating simple organisms as agents was viewed with suspicion. After all, Descartes told us, animals are mere machines. Only humans are res cogitans, the thinking thing. And I disagree. I believe that the new paradigm in biology gives the opposite answer. Every participant in the dynamics of natural evolution is an agent with interests, acting with and through its environment. So the crucial change is to understand every living being as a perceiving agent, an experiencing agent, a valuable agent within its particular environment. This change, ladies and gentlemen, means to see life now as a process that involves far more factors than traditional science allowed. Biological agents represent a new form of matter energy in the universe. We are living matter. We are ontologically emergent. Call it ontological emergence. That is, the whole, the agency, has causal powers that are not possessed by the parts. Now, volumes have been written about human agency. In fact, we have loved to separate the human completely from the animal, especially from the individual cell. It is now we recognize a fact that the universe has created agents who become their own source of action and value. The philosophers traditionally, not just the theologians, but the philosophers argued for the uniqueness of persons. They said, for example, we are the one animal that walks upright to see each other directly and to look upward to see the God. We are the animal that makes love face to face, uniquely, building relationship as we reproduce. And Pico della Mirandola said in the 15th century, we are the animal without a form. All other animals have their destiny given to them, but we are the animal, he said, who, like God, has no limitations on who we are or what we can do. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that the antecedents of these properties exist already throughout the natural world of life. Let's think about some of the qualities of the very first living beings, the very first interacting, even single-celled organisms. Listen, even the first living beings had both an inner dimension and an outer dimension. They were separated by the cell wall from their environment, and they contained information inside. So the distinction between inside and outside existed from the beginning. The behavior of the first organisms could not be explained by physics. That is, the interaction in an environment is not a property of physics. It is, as we say in science, a new dynamic, a new emergent dynamic in the world. Third, each living organism has interests. That is, it seeks to live and not to die, which means it seeks nutrition and seeks to avoid toxins or poisons for it. Stuart Kaufman describes it with humor, and he says, every living thing is out to make a living, to earn its living in the world. No electron is out to earn a living, right? This is a category you can only apply to living things. And finally, every living organism has value. There is for the organism a good outcome and a bad outcome. This is not true for physics alone. Imagine the last member of a species. This is a small mammal which can do gliding. You know, it has arms with webbing, so it can glide. And it's in the tree. And let's call her Florence. And Florence is in the tree. She's the last living member of this species. And the bird, the predator, comes toward her. And she has to decide in an instant, do I jump left or do I jump right? So she decides to jump left. But unfortunately, the bird was heading in the same direction, and Florence is eaten. C'est dommage. At that moment, a species ends. A unique combination of features, of genes, is finished, perhaps never to be expressed again. Do you understand? We cannot view this state of affairs as value-free. Some things are saved and some things are lost. When we destroy the Amazon forest, with so many species, so many bacteria that are unique, we take away from the value of the world. Also, we take away from our own chances of survival. So do you see? You cannot speak of the biological world without the concept of value. And we know that an individual person is unique. And now we recognize that a species is unique, but also contingent. The loss of a species is a permanent loss to the planet. Very briefly, I want to describe a new school in biology. The school is called biosemiotics. Biosemiotics. It begins with the notion that every agent in the biological world is an interpreter or a system of interpretation. With organisms, we see a new kind of causality in the world. Perhaps we can say formal causality, as in the philosophy of Aristotle. Biosemiotics studies biology as goal-directed behavior, as teleological agency. Every simple organism is a unit of meaning, of interpretation, of purpose. That is, every organism is an interpreting being. Whenever you have a biological system, you have an interpreter, the organism. You have an environment which is being interpreted, and you have an interpretation. So the organism believes that there is a glucose gradient, and it swims up the gradient to get nourishment. That's an interpretation, no? And the organism is already interpreting. Maybe I could say that it is a meaningful action to move to the food source. Or the organism makes a mistake and swims toward a toxin and dies. That was an interpretation, and it was a false interpretation. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you see the new story that we can tell from this starting point? It is a story of emergence. There is not a qualitative difference as life goes from the most simple structures to more and more and more complicated structures. In fact, our program in the new paradigm is to understand this long growth of complexity from the simplest to the most complex. But remembering that even the most simple organisms perceive their environment, that they know things, they are aware of things around them, though without consciousness. Humans do these same things, but now with consciousness, with feeling, with values, and with intentions. The study of all life is the study of relationships. The individual and the community, just like us. The famous British author John Donne wrote, "No man is an island." And this is true across biology, psychology, and spirituality. So, ladies and gentlemen, does spirit emerge from matter? Right? That's in the title of our session, from matter to spirit. Yes, without a doubt. But how are we to understand this? Well, At first, maybe we don't speak of it as spirit. In fact, the scientific way has been reduction, not emergence, but to take everything down to the bottom. Stephen Weinberg, whom Tuan quoted, says that all explanatory arrows point downward. All explanations go to the bottom, to the selfish gene, or to the fundamental physical forces. The new paradigm moves in the opposite direction. Now the movement is upward, the growing complexity, the growing awareness of power, of knowledge, of possibility. And we see that most fully in human beings. We are that animal that has the power of imagination. The power of imagination is to take our context and imagine it differently. We see it in the great authors, in Molière and Flaubert, in Shakespeare. We see it in the great musicians, to imagine a kind of sound, in Beethoven or Mozart. We imagine the world as a better place. We can imagine world peace, even though we've never seen it at all. Or our biological evolution teaches us to see the other as an enemy in a process of competition. But we can imagine universal altruism, universal compassion, a universal care for others. And, ladies and gentlemen, as we begin to imagine, we recognize that we are not limited to our environment, to what we see with our eyes. We begin to recognize that beneath the appearances is something more profound. That beyond this world as a whole is something more distinct. And I believe that spirituality is our response to this new world that we see. The notion of spirit, in the fullest sense of the word, I believe, has its meaning against the background of an ultimate reality. And from this perspective, we see and understand ourselves. It's interesting. Spirituality can be a response to this world. Spirituality can be completely naturalistic. There can be a kind of transcendence which is horizontal. In a sense, spirituality is moving out into the world around us. What interests me is, in addition to that, a dimension of moving upward, of moving towards something transcendent, towards something beyond. You see, for theology, it's different. If God is spirit, if we are imago Dei, in the image of God, then we are also, in some sense, spirit. But in what sense? Science doesn't force us to speak of spirit. It's not proven by science. And yet, we are clearly, as we understand the natural world, we are upwardly open. So open to possibilities that transcend us. Listen, 4 conditions have to be met if there is to be the language of spirit, the emergence of spirit. First, the world must not be determinate, completely determinate, and it's not. Second, a full reduction to the most basic level of reality, say physical forces, must be impossible. It must be impossible to explain life in terms of physics. And it is. Third, complexity must increase across evolutionary history, the evolution of life. And it does. And fourth, there must be a sense of transcendence in humans. And there is. One cannot prove God from science, but one can speak of God in light of the best science of our day. What is the theology that would arise from the scientific paradigm of our day? It would be a theology that uses concepts like participation, that we participate in the divine as the divine participates in us. It would be a notion of the immanence in God, and not, as they say, Deus absconditus, the God who is only distant. It would be a theology of reciprocity, of back and forth between the human and the divine. Do you know that St. Augustine wrote about his experience? He said, God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. He also wrote, I say it first in Latin and then English, Interior intimo meo et superior summo meo. In English, God is higher than my highest and more inward than my inmost self. Let me conclude. I do agree with Tuan that the world is re-enchanted. What's interesting is the different speakers have all spoken of the re-enchantment of the world, but from 4 different scientific perspectives. I think that's fascinating, maybe unexpected. Second, whatever the materialists tell you, reduction fails. It was a bet, right? They said, I'll bet you 100 euros that we will succeed in reducing everything downward. And I would say it's a bad bet. Don't accept it. I think the new information suggests the world cannot be reduced downward. I have argued that all of life involves agents, the value of agents, causes by agents, choices by agents, the value of agents. I've argued that there is a steady growth of complexity, of understanding, of spiritual agency. In fact, I've argued that spiritual practices are basic to man. I've suggested that human freedom of thought allows us to think the idea of an ultimate reality which either is above us or beneath us or surrounds us like the water in which the fish swim. And finally, from the theological perspective, spirit precedes life. Spirit follows life. Spirit permeates, fills life. Yes, spirit arises in the material world. And yes, spirit was operating in the material world from the beginning. could it be that the goal of life, the essence of life, the deepest value of life is the Spirit? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Un grand merci à Philippe. Je n'ai pas mentionné son ouvrage dont le titre est en écho avec cette conférence, Aux origines de la liberté, l'émergence de l'esprit dans le monde naturel. Et vous avez vu que ce qui est très intéressant, c'est que ce nouveau paradigme, cette nouvelle vision du monde, c'est quelque chose qui justement détruit les anciennes frontières. Mais au-delà de ces frontières, on peut reconstruire de différentes façons. La façon de reconstruire de Philippe, c'est justement ce dont il est un des grands spécialistes, la philosophie de l'émergence. C'est-à-dire la base, vous savez, la phrase clé du réductionnisme, c'est « le tout n'est rien d'autre que la somme des parties ». L'homme n'est rien d'autre qu'un ensemble de molécules. La nature n'est rien d'autre qu'un ensemble de matières premières à exploiter. Et ici, on est justement dans le non-réductionnisme, que ce soit en physique, en astronomie, en biologie, dans tous les domaines que nous avons vus. Et donc, là, ce qu'en tire Philippe, donc, c'est cette idée de la philosophie de l'émergence, qu'effectivement, il y a quelque chose qui émerge, qui est au-delà de tout ce que les composants peuvent expliquer. Et c'est là où il y a une place, bien sûr, comme il l'a montré, pour la transcendance. Maintenant, eh bien, nous allons entendre le père Thierry Magnin, et c'est ça qui est intéressant parce que justement, c'est deux façons différentes, pas du tout contradictoires, mais différentes justement de dériver quelque chose de ce que nous avons vu. Vous allez voir avec entre autres la notion d'incomplétude. Le père Thierry Magnin est à la fois un physicien quantique de haut niveau, il a eu un prix de l'Académie des sciences pour ses travaux, il a enseigné à l'École des mines de Saint-Étienne, à l'Université de Lille, mais il est également donc devenu prêtre catholique, a fait une thèse de théologie sur les rapports science et foi. Et aujourd'hui, il est le recteur de l'Université catholique de Lyon, une énorme université pour l'Université catholique, 9000 étudiants qui collaborent, et c'est un cas assez unique d'ailleurs, il n'y a que Lyon et Lille, je crois, en France, qui collaborent avec les universités d'État.